Hey everybody, my name is Romke Haan. I'm the president of Bandit Coders and Toolbox 9. 2025 was a really interesting year that brought a lot of innovation, a lot of challenges to businesses all over the world. And today I have Jason Miller, who's our Chief Technology Officer, go through and review what we learned in 2025 and what some of our hopes are for 2026. Jason, really excited to have you here on our little show today.
Appreciate you having me.
What is the thing that you are felt most challenged by in 2025?
I think the whole AI landscape has been crazy. A lot of it is easy to digest, but it's changing so fast. So it's very difficult to stay up on things while still trying to learn them and implement them at the same time. So that's been a huge challenge.
Yeah, it's the conversations that we had over the year. I feel like there would just be weeks gone by, and you would just say, "This is completely different now," and so
Yeah, completely.
I had a hard time keeping up with all the things you were keeping up with. I couldn't imagine you kind of going in and changing everything. What's been that challenge? We've seen a lot of really interesting emerging trends that have happened over the years. But why don't we spend some time kind of reflecting on uh, uh, those learnings in 2025 and see what we can get out of it. There's kind of been a new reality. I feel like this has been a seismic shift. In February in 2025, I went to Google Next, and I could not believe the amount of conversation that was swirling around AI and how impactful it had. I feel like the year before there was a lot of kind of guessing of what technology was doing, but in 2025 there was a lot of practical applications to AI, and not just on the software engineering side, but how it's impacting folks, in their general day to day business. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way. Out of Google Next, there was a lot of really cool stuff that came out, like just all this like whiz bang, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm excited to try and dig into this and implement these things. There was almost a bit of a disconnect. Like we saw that high, and then it came down, and then it was like, oh, okay, here's what we're actually working with. Like I felt like there was a big distance between where the tooling was at and what people were doing and what was being shown at the conferences. Right? It's like, where's all this middle ground that we can make up to even implement something like they're showing?
Yeah, it was really fascinating things. Um, so let's shift gears on the CTO. As we look at 2025, there was a lot of different things around security complexity. Obviously, we were talking about AI, hyperscalers as cloud is kind of cloud plus. They're introducing new features and functionality as their maturity grows and their business grows. And then technical debt with all these new technologies that are being implemented. How are older technologies being sunsetted or refactored? I think even in our own environments, as we were trying to keep up with generative AI, there was a lot of things that were kind of left in the dust that we had to clean up. What are some of the things that you saw from a technology leadership perspective that people were really worried about?
I don't know. In some ways, I feel like people have almost kind of forgotten the old, right? They're just very focused on the new and maybe not how the new can integrate with the old or bring up the old. Um, it's in a weird way, it's almost kind of created a divide
Mm.
where you're almost kind of stuck in the old and scared to do something with that, or you're just kind of jumping ship and getting into the new stuff and just being like, okay, bye with the old. We're doing something new. But obviously, that creates a whole bunch of problems in itself that have to be flushed out.
Yeah, we definitely have seen that with a lot of leadership just mandating, "Hey, I want this new technology implemented to the system," without really care about legacy infrastructure, how it impacts that. And so, a lot of organizations were kind of picking up, I guess, the impact, the whatever had the blast radius of those new transformations. I know that it was hard for a lot of organizations as new AI technologies were coming into play, how people were signing up for them, not necessarily aware that, somebody had signed up for a certain platform and utilized them internally. Keeping track of all that was a huge pain, still a huge pain.
Yeah, and we saw a lot of that ourselves with some of the tooling that we played around with, especially in the security space. When you start looking at these dashboards, and you're like, "Oh, wow!" There's like all kinds of crazy stuff going on that we didn't previously have visibility into, or it would have taken somebody in that role to specifically dig into that. And I think for me, it was pretty eye opening. Of like, oh wow! I mean, you want to enable your people, but sometimes maybe that needs to be reined in a little bit, or they need to have a better understanding of like what that means when you connect to that other service and expose that. Um,
Yeah, it's really a balance between speed and security, right, or
yeah,
compliance. A lot of these tools, I think the biggest risk that people were taking, where a lot of these tools were digesting kind of internal customer information, and a lot of these tools were new for the companies that were building them. It reminds me of the GitHub issue that was introduced. I think it was like the maybe in the first half of the year, where if you knew the information in the private repo, you could ask Copilot information, and it was pulling back some of that private repo. So Microsoft had to take a step back and clean up that information. So, the risk was it's kind of unknown. It feels so Wild West. Um, we're old school, so it feels like I feel like very early tech days where we were just putting things together and throwing it against a wall and not really sure what the security was there. So there's really a balance of caution, because you don't want to risk throwing some of your data into a model, or even having a model itself, right? Like you created your own model and that spills out into another model. There's a lot of danger behind that. And so
yeah, for sure.
putting that together, I think, is really important. We've been really cautious. We had one customer where they were trying to have a very private AI model that was generating recommendations for them, and we helped them with the hardware. We helped them pick out the tools that they could use to keep that information private. But even with that, it was constantly checking and verifying that this data is actually staying inside the ecosystem that we created for it.
I think there's also a component between the organization and the employees, right? Like a lot of organizations are trying to enable their employees by giving them access to AI. I mean, let's just say like Gemini, for example, through Workspace. But do these organizations have clear guidelines of how it's being used, who has access to it, and is there lines being crossed as far as like an employee feeling comfortable to interact with AI, but in reality, that information is being shared with the organization or whatever. So it's not to say that it's wrong or right. It's just that I think organizations probably haven't grappled with, okay, we need like internal guidelines that spell this all out for the privacy of our people. And yeah, it's very complex.
Yeah, I mean, it comes to education across the landscape, right? You have someone that's saying, "Hey, let's use this tool," but I already have a limited scope of what I understand about technology, and
Hmm.
so maybe I'm asking it confidential information. I'm
That's
not
right.
I'm not in a secure. Uh, I'm using Gemini's uh, personal account versus a workspace account. Same thing with ChatGPT, right? There's things that go back into the model versus thing
Yep.
using the business accounts, which kind of keep that information a little bit more private. And so, just simply understanding those things, I think has been a huge hurdle. So AI has been dominating our conversation. It's also been dominating our world. But is there anything else from a CTO perspective that you think has been on the mind of or which in the conversations that you've had has been on the mind of some of the leadership that you've been working with over the year?
Yes, security is always a big deal, right? Like that's kind of outside of the whole AI conversation or what's happening today. I mean, that's just kind of an ongoing trend that just becomes more and more important as we move forward. And a lot of that is just because of the threat actors out there that are uh, growing. As the technology grows, it becomes so as things become easier for us, it becomes easier for them too. And so that's an ongoing challenge that isn't specific to this moment in time. It's just
Yeah.
this is something we have to stay on top of.
Yeah, I mean, the attack vectors are getting a lot more broad, right? You have
Yeah,
SaaS being such a huge base of organizations' ecosystems. Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, and those are all the big ones. But then you have all these smaller industry-specific SaaS players that are, providing some type of use case for the end customer. One of the things that I was able to do this year is help release the SaaS capability security framework, which we're encouraging industry to create some type of standard around security configurations in their SaaS platform. And so things like that, I think hopefully will have an impact where, SaaS vendors will see it and say, okay, I'm going to create these types of features and functionality so that my tenants, my customers have a better landscape. But, the amount of SaaS breaches, Salesforce had a really terrible year this year with so many different things. Microsoft, there's a slew of things that a lot of these SaaS providers are dealing with, and threat actors are using those tools to be able to get into the organization, and then a lot of these tools are integrated with every aspect of the business, and so using that kind of as a backdoor to access some and do some nefarious things.
yeah, for sure. And even on the just regular IT front, I mean, I know here in my area we had a couple cities that were attacked and they had the whole ransomware situation. And I think it's known that in a lot of cases, government moves a little bit slower as far as systems and software and whatever. And it's like if the if the attackers are moving fast and your infrastructure is moving slow and it's outdated or whatever, it kind of makes you an easy target. Uh,
Yeah,
that's
it's
been a
kind of
big
like what we
challenge
we talked about with AI, right? Like a lot of these local and state governments, they don't have the education or the understanding about proper security for SaaS for their platforms, making sure that simple things like two-factor authentication are enabled. Now, a lot of SaaS players are forcing these organizations to do it, but um, you know, not having that or keeping track of your logs are simple mistakes that could create a bigger problem.
for sure.
All right, so let's get back on the future of AI, as we were talking about, has been uh, getting a chokehold across the business landscape. I'm not even going to say IT. Every aspect from individuals using generative AI to analyze data, ask questions, to software engineers, really utilizing uh, the tools that AI offers for generating code, validating code inside your CI/CD framework. Even the agent architecture has just blown up in the last couple months. I've created different agents for simple tasks just to kind of understand it, but also realize the power that I can, you know, feed the agent just some commands or some data, and it'll go out and process something for me. I just saw HubSpot released an NPC server, and I'm really excited to dig into those types of things to see, how can we automate things? How can we get better at our overall business? Um, let's focus right now on some of the code generation. Jason, you've been doing an amazing job building applications and platforms. I know we've gotten a couple customer environments like full production generative AI code. What have been some of the biggest learnings that you've got? Can you kind of just walk me through that journey that like how you started, your curiosity, some of the things you learned, some of the challenges? I think this stuff is pretty exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I started on it maybe, I mean, really just kind of like diving in probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, I think. And it started kind of just with chat, right? Like ChatGPT came out and you had access to generate code, but it was very disconnected from the tooling. So in the early days, you would just be putting stuff into ChatGPT and then copying it over to your project or whatever. And it was very manual. And as it started to evolve, obviously people were trying to integrate these tools. And so then we started seeing stuff like Copilot and Cursor and, Claude Code. And the first iteration of Copilot was kind of weird because it was kind of more of like a code complete situation, which was great. I mean, when you're manually coding things and it can kind of like suggest things as you're going, it seemed like that first level of like, oh, okay, this is starting to get cool and this is speeding up things. But there was a vast difference from those days and how it is today. But I think for me, one of the hardest parts was, just staying up on it while still doing the work, right? Like you're in the work and you're trying to actually complete this project, but the technology and the tooling and everything is almost moving faster than you're building your project. And so you kind of get halfway into a project and you're like, oh, this isn't even the cool way to do it anymore. Like there's people already on this other thing. And of course, you're not going to backtrack and redo it. And so one of the first projects that I put out that was completely AI generated, um, you know, disclaimer, I sat and babysitted it the whole time, right? This isn't something that I just one-shotted and it just came up with this whole platform or whatever.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
definitely a process of, you know, prompt, evaluating what came back, doing the whole pull request and reviewing everything. And, um, in some ways it's faster, but in some ways it's actually slower too. But anyways, that first project, I dealt with that a lot because it took so much time to kind of stand all that up and learn the process and make sure I was doing it safe and that I was understanding all the code and we weren't generating things that somebody wouldn't have created on their own. And throughout that whole process, there was so many times where I wanted to jump ship and go to this new thing. It's like, oh, we can't have to see it through, get it out. And it was fine. That particular project went out. It was great. Very little issues after it was out. And it was mainly just because of how hands on I was throughout the process. But if I'm starting one today, I'm I'm looking to speed that up and really like dial that in. And so my main focus today is repeatability and consistency. Like I want whatever it is, I don't even care what the tooling is or the framework or whatever. I want to understand how I can use that tool in a very predictable and repeatable way because I think that's the key thing moving forward. If it's always just going to be this variable output, that's very hard to manage and very hard to build a real project around that.
Yeah, so you essentially have a development environment. You're using, various code generation tools. I remember we were talking about like vibe coding, and vibe coding is like the direction, and you're like, nah, man, check out the spec-driven development. Um, I thought, and reading GitHub spec-driven development architecture, I thought was a lot smarter than what we were experiencing in the vibe code world, which is cool. I think it was a cool start to kind of get going. But maybe you can give us a high level of like how spec-driven development is the next phase of what vibe coding. I mean, I guess you can still call it vibe coding, but I like when things are a little bit more polished and professional and architected. It makes it give it a standard to be able to build something instead of just like if it would felt like a spiritual guru of coding.
Right. I think it was funny for me because it felt like this spec-driven development came out of nowhere, and it was like, okay, this is going to be the new thing for AI. And then as I started to dig into it, I was like, so actually, this is how we've been doing it the whole time. I mean, even before AI, we were building things off a spec, right? Like all the
Yeah.
various documentation that you would put in place and then hand that off to a developer and they would start building it manually. So the more I kind of dove into it, I was like, oh, this actually just makes sense. So when we're, breaking the project up into, epics and stories and tasks or whatever, we've been doing that the whole time. So it made complete sense to me to give the AI model those small chunks and just let it focus on that as
Yeah.
opposed to this, like, I'm going to one shot this entire application. Right? And I think that's for me, that's where a lot of that consistency and repeatability started to come in because it was like, oh, wow, if I'm giving it these small chunks, I'm getting a very predictable output. And it's also a manageable output that I can review and make sure is good or whatever. And so for me, like I said, it made sense. And I think it's probably the only path forward, really. I mean, call it whatever you want. Everybody's doing it in different ways, and I've even explored this myself of and asked the question, am I overcomplicating this, right? By doing all this upfront work, is the model actually smart enough to understand? And I am experiencing a little bit of that. So I say, do it however you want, but breaking it up into these chunks and having kind of the spec, if you will, of what it is you're building is huge.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how we're taking like old practices of creating documentation, epic stories, and reapplying it with this new technology, right? It, it
Yeah.
it gives a lot more certainty for the product team, for the architects, for the engineers to really, you know, take the same process, and we're not just randomly building things. We're trying to, understand and design a process that we're already getting into a new framework, which is generative AI.
Yeah. For sure.
How about on the SaaS side of generative AI, with I would say the non-engineering team? Have you seen anything that you thought is maybe going to change in 2026? Um, for me, I'm starting to see kind of a lot more of operations using it to analyze financial data, to analyze a workflow and recommend new opportunities. There's almost this world that I'm seeing when it comes to all these SaaS tools that we use, kind of congregating around a generative AI workflow, where I'm asking it certain things and getting new experiences as I go down certain rabbit holes. Like, let's say a financial rabbit hole, Google has a financial agent. So does Copilot, I believe. That as a finance person, it has a good understanding around finances and will display certain UI depending on what I'm asking it. Is there anything that you're seeing from a business side of things, or the business side of the house, when it comes to AI practices?
Well, I will say that I have not really been out exploring all the different SaaS offerings and AI enabled applications and stuff, and I've almost kind of deliberately stayed away from that because I'm in this maker space where I'm building my own stuff. I'm not trying to consume other people's
Mhm.
products, and unless it's relevant or whatever. But I think probably the biggest place that I've seen this kind of grow outside of my space is in the automation. So you're seeing platforms like N8N and Make and stuff really. I mean, they were big. I don't want to say they weren't big, but I think when they started introducing AI into some of these platforms, for me, it was N8N, but I know that there's Zapier and Make and whatever. But N8N was the focus for me, and I think when they started implementing AI in there, it just kind of opened up a whole new world of like, okay, now business users and such can create their own workflows and automate things, these repetitive tasks that they're just trying to get off their plate or whatever. And there's still some technical know-how needed to get it up and running, but it's kind of changed um, the way I do work, right? Like there's things where historically I've always been a builder, mainly front end and back end systems or whatever, but now clients are approaching me with problems that are outside of that. It N8N or something like that is the solution um, for that problem, and so it's been kind of interesting expanding out into that space.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very fascinating. I'm curious on, how a lot of these tools are creating features and functionality that's integrating into their systems, right? The Salesforce agents that were created, or some of the things that you were mentioning that are kind of like almost like middleware AI agents that are connecting, like a more plussed up UI path or MuleSoft in a sense, right? Like these
Yeah,
middleware agents that are um, just kind of superpowering the ability for a non-technical user to create integrations and workflows.
I
Pretty
think it's also fair to say that there's a lot of stuff out there now that doesn't need AI that people are forcing AI into,
Yeah.
which is kind of creating a weird situation. And I don't know where that's going to go. It's not really for me to decide. If you want to put AI in your product, cool, do whatever. But I'm just in some of the tools that I've used over the years. It's starting to surface, and it's like,
Yeah.
did you do that just to say you put AI in it, or
Right,
like
right.
what is this
It's
actually
like
doing?
yeah, every conference that I've gone to, like every single booth has something AI in it, and sometimes I'm
Yeah,
just like, really, is that really what you need? Like at
right.
CES a couple weeks ago, they had an AI enabled television that would generate images based on something. But I was like, this is totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
One thing that I do see that is actually uh, interesting is edge computing, and you have things like Waymo and devices that are processing a lot of information kind of in real time on a device, and installing an agent, or I mean some type of AI integration into the hardware, so that it can figure out what it needs to figure out right then and there. At CES, there was so many different robotics. Um, it was interesting. I was in the Korea area, and there was I didn't know, but somebody had said this, that Korea has the highest penetration of robotics usage than any other country, and the amount of robotics that they have created is insane. But the need for a lot of that processing to happen on the hardware is important. And I don't think this is going to impact every single industry, right? But you have things like manufacturing that are, using robotics to create tools. Things like facilities that have security that are, have um, now like drones and robots with cameras that are able to respond and communicate with folks, to medical, all the different devices that people are using that'll have this AI enabled hardware. It was really, really exciting. to see all the possibilities of that. They had even had a fighting robot, which I thought was really cool.
Nice.
I stayed in that booth way too long, but it was cool to see. One of the coolest innovations was a hardware company that had combined the CPU and the RAM essentially in one piece of hardware, which reduces the footprint of what's needed to compute on a device. So a lot of just crazy innovations. I think in the next 10 years, you're going to see a boom of edge computing and robotics really kind of seeping into our day-to-day lives. I mean, you see hints of it with all the Atlas and all the other robots that are out there, but um, nothing that's penetrating the market here yet. As much as we have our iRobots that are
Right.
that are cleaning up our floors.
Yeah, I'm really drawn to technology of any form that solves problems. And I don't know, this is probably outside the scope of this conversation, but I've wondered what's the end game in a lot of these things, right? Because if your if the idea is to reduce manpower, right, but then have a, $20 million robot or whatever, it's like that didn't really achieve that. Um, and so I don't know. There's a lot of like high level thinking that goes on around that, but then there's a lot of like lower level, like, okay, cool, let's build a robot. Like I'm down.
Yeah.
But it's more of like a societal thing of like, where are we going with this? And again, probably outside the scope of this conversation, but something I can't stop thinking about
Yeah.
as I'm going down this path myself.
I mean, I think this is really important. We had this conversation not too long ago. I mean, if you think about AI and robotics, I remember you had said something that really struck me about entry level folks coming into engineering, right? And how with generative AI, you need to have a mastery of skill because if you don't know what's being generated by the code, that's going to have a real impact on you delivering something that may not necessarily work. The 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 agent may tell you everything's fine, but if you don't necessarily understand what's behind the curtain, that could really have a long lasting impact. And so,
100%.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and the agent will lie to you, just so you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It will
yeah,
100% lie to you, tell you it's totally fine, everything works perfect.
yeah. You have great
Um,
hair. It'll say
right,
all these
all of
things.
that. Yeah, for me, picking up these tools has been, I don't want to say easy, but kind of in some ways, right? But it's built on 25 years of programming. So I understand what it's doing. When I'm putting in a prompt and I'm watching all the stuff scroll in the window, like I can immediately catch something and be like, nope, that's off course. Stop it, correct it, or whatever. But if you don't even understand the technology to begin with, you'll just watch that window scroll. And then at the end, it'll be like, I just built you the greatest app ever. And then it doesn't even launch or whatever. Like it's just crazy.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, generative AI in general, edge computing, all these security platforms that are out there. There's a lot of new things that are happening that, if as in tech leadership, I'm sure is getting a lot of people sweating on their roadmap. This reminds me a lot of when we were just getting into the cloud and how risk adverse a lot of folks were. Like, no, I am not moving my technology on off prem and into someone else's environment.
Right.
um, and the hesitation. But once organizations were moving there, they were realizing how resilient their infrastructure was, how fast they could deploy things, how secure they could make it, and how essentially more cost effective, which allows them to not think about having an on-premise environment and really worried about the business and the technology. We're starting to see that a lot more with AI, in my opinion, in that way, where we're thinking about we can really focus on thinking about the business and even getting to the point where, generative AI is pushing something for you.
Yeah, for sure. I, you know, I think, going back to the idea of, like, having it solve things, like pushing towards something that actually solves something. In your example, like with the IT infrastructure, right? Like if somebody set that up to begin with and everything was like perfect, it was all secure and whatever. And then a few years goes by and that guy leaves. And then the new guy comes in and he's like, yeah, I don't really want to touch it because that wasn't mine. I didn't set that up. And they just repeat that over and over throughout the
Right.
years, right? That's how you end up in these situations where stuff is outdated, it's not secure or whatever. And, to your point, I think cloud was like a huge advantage there, right? So you could just move your stuff to the cloud and then they kind of focused on a lot of that stuff, um, keeping it secure and keeping it modern and whatever. And it allowed you to kind of focus more on those business problems. Like, okay, what can we now use the technology in house? We don't have to focus on that anymore. Like, what can we do here in house to solve problems, to create efficiencies?
Well, I think we've exhausted our listeners for our first little show. 39 minutes in. But any final takeaways, any thoughts around that you'd want to give technical leadership around 2026 and what to be excited about?
Well, as always, security. Make sure make sure your stuff's secure. I don't care how you do it, right? Like if you're building it manually, you're having AI build it or whatever, stay focused on that. It's gonna be huge. And yeah, I don't know, just experiment with it, keep pushing it forward. I think we're all kind of in our own silos doing our own thing, but every time that we do something and kind of push it out or talk about it in the community, it just drives everybody else to push further too. So keep
Yeah,
making, keep sharing, and trying to make it better.
yeah, that's a really good point. As technical leadership, lean on your community, right? You're not going to be able to figure out, not even in your organization, having that leadership to leadership conversation so that you can kind of, uh, you know, gain a collective knowledge about what you've been experimenting on, what's been working, what's not been working. I think that's some really solid advice. All right, my man. Well, great to have this conversation.
Yes,
It
sir.
feels like it's our conversations that we usually have now in public.
Right.
Uh, but all right, thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope you let's chime in again.